I didn't hear from anybody else. So.
No.
Good evening and welcome to Aurora Council Chambers Special Council Workshop, Wednesday, December the 14th. It is 7:02. Councillors, declarations of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof, please. Seeing none, I may have a motion to approve the agenda as has been amended, please. Councillor Abel, Councillor Thompson, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. I've never seen this before, Madam Clerk, introduction. The purpose of the meeting is Council passed a resolution about a month ago to invite the school board to come and speak to us with respect to their plans and for the future of a potential school we'll call it Aurora East. So that's the purpose. We extended the invitation. The school trustee, Mr. Peter Adams, is joining us this evening to give council a presentation. So we first start with delegations. We have one delegate, Sandra Manhurst, a resident. Sandra, could you join us at the podium, please? If you could give us your name and your address, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Sandra Manhurst, 23 Peterman Street. First, I'd just like to say that this, so we've chatted with some parents, and the meeting is quite close to Christmas, and so as you can see, it's a little harder to get a crowd out at Christmas time than it is a little bit before Christmas, but we will pass along all the information that we get tonight back to the crowd again. Okay, so according to demographic data, Aurora's population has grown 30% in the last 10 years. Families with kids at home have grown 30% also, staggering compared to the Ontario's average growth of 6%. While Aurora's population continues to grow and thrive, our designated high school's population, G.W. Williams, continues to fall. Its attendance has dropped significantly each year since 2010 and is now at approximately 56% capacity. Over 3/4 of Aurora has been designated to go to G.W. Williams, and yet it still doesn't reach capacity despite the population rising, despite development, and despite the rise in families with school-aged children at home. If the board was meeting the demands of the community, would its numbers be falling significantly when the population is rising dramatically? To help boost numbers, the board has tried increasing the school's boundaries with no effect. It tried adding the Enrich program with no effect. And it will be adding the IB program in the fall, and in all fairness, it will likely add about 100 to 150 students. But realistically, it's still insignificant for the enrollment issues. So what's the board missing? It's missing the importance of school location within a community, the value families place on a school within walking distance of their homes. Enrollment is dropping because the families are leaving the public school board to walk to the Catholic one. We need a high school on Bayview. In 2007, the board considered relocating Williams to the Bayview side. They did a feasibility report that concluded it was the most prudent choice at the time, not only financially for the board, but also in the best interest of the community based on where future students would be coming from, the safety of those students, traffic flow for the town, and encouraging health benefits vis-a-vis an active community that walks to school. 600 people in town didn't like the plan, and to be honest, I don't blame them for 3 specific reasons. 1, the plan required input from the whole town, but the development between Bayview and Leslie hadn't occurred yet. Those it would impact most didn't exist to have a voice in the matter. 2, the plan was to tear down a heritage site instead of preserving it. And 3, the plan was to send the kids on Yonge Street across town rather than to their local high school that they could walk to. Half the town at the time still had to commute. Not an ideal plan. Now, what if the board had input from all relevant voices? What if most every child in Aurora could walk to school? What if students on one side of town were being supported by a high school on Wellington, and students on the other side of town were being supported by a school on Bayview? In this scenario, everyone goes to school within the community they live, and walking is much more reasonable. What if it preserved a heritage site instead of destroying it? What if it modeled it after the Philadelphia policy framework? For those of you that are unfamiliar with it, Philadelphia had 32 vacant schools it needed to address. It developed a policy framework for repurposing schools. It worked with the city councilors and the local community. It analyzed the property for its unique strengths. It took the community's input on programming and service needs. It established a criteria that bidders for the property needed to meet And when it put out a bid and approved it, it chose the one that met those conditions or criteria. The framework allowed the preservation of historic buildings, it met the community's needs for programming and services, and it catalyzed investment within the community. Now, if the board had used a model like this in 2007, would it have gotten a more positive response? I think it would have. Now, we can't go back, we can only move forward, and 10 years later, where do we stand? The area between Bayview and Leslie is now developed, and the families have large concerns. Between 800 and 900 of us do, and this number is still growing. Williams's enrollment is at 56% capacity. We are teetering on a reduction of programming, a reduction of extracurricular activities, and a reduction of specialized teachers and staff. It's not the best scenario for kids on either side of school, or town. I've said this before, this issue isn't about the residents, it's about our children and only our children. This is about all of us, parents, council, and board, being accountable to the kids these schools service. It's about what's in their best interests, what's going to give them the best education, the best programming, and the best opportunities. So what I would like to know is, what's the board plan to address our concerns? How long do we need to wait for a school our kids can walk to on Bayview, considering we've been patiently waiting almost 10 years and things aren't getting better, they're getting worse? And lastly, what steps can we take together, parents, council, and board, to move this cause forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Manhurst. May I have a motion to receive the presentation, please? Councillor Maracus, thank you. Councillor Thompson, comments or questions for Ms. Manhurst? Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you again, Sandra, for stepping forward. You said at the beginning there wasn't much of a crowd and you would be reporting back. Could you tell us how many people you'll be reporting back to?
So again, there's, as I said, the group's between 800 and 900 large.
That's signed on with you?
Yes.
That's significant, okay. I appreciate you talking about the Philadelphia policy, because I truly believe that the repurposing of G.W. Williams is the route to go. So thank you for bringing that up. And it was very nicely said. By doing a building on Bayview, everyone gets to walk, and that's what it's all about. So thanks very much.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you for being here tonight. You've raised some really good points, as well as, while I'm not familiar with that Philadelphia policy, I find the concept interesting. I just want to know whether or not you've shared that with the board, or perhaps delegated to the board and presented some of that information for their consideration.
No, my understanding was today was a chance for us to chat with Peter Adam Luchowski, and so this, to be frank, this is the first time I've mentioned it to the board themselves, yes.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? All in favor of receipt? Oh, Councillor Kim, pardon me.
Thank you, Ms. Manhurst. In terms of the 56% enrollment at G.W. Williams, where did you get that figure from?
From the attendance from the board themselves. So the board publicizes kind of what their enrollments are. Earlier this year as well, when we came to council, we had been notified too of the principal and what his current enrollment count was at the time, and it calculates to about 56%, 55, 56, somewhere around there, just over half.
Okay.
So the numbers come from the board themselves and from the local principal.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kim. Nobody else? All in favor of receipt, please? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out. Next, we have a presentation by the York Region District School Board Trustee, Peter Adams. Mr. Adams, if you'd come up to the podium, please. And if you could give us your name and your address, and you have 10 minutes, sir, for the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm Peter Adams Luchowski. I'm a resident of Richmond Hill and the school trustee for Aurora and King Township. Thank you for that delegation. I have no argument with any of the points made. I've heard of this, and there's very, very sound and sensible recommendations or suggestions. So as a result, I brought with me some expert staff from the York Region District School Board who can speak to the facts of governance of our board, as well as the ministerial guidelines we have for constructing schools. And we also have history of the decision to purchase that property on Bayview in 2007, as at that time I was a member of the board serving Richmond Hill, and I had been on the board approximately 90 days. As a board member, I'm not able to speak on behalf of the board, so I'm here as a courtesy, and I'm here to answer questions to councilors to the best of my ability, in all honesty. But I can't bind any comments. There's nothing I can say. Delegation, as suggested to the board, would be the best way for residents to share their concerns and ask questions of the entire board, because as one of 12 members, I account for one vote in that process. I have no authority, and as councilors, you all understand that, because I believe we're guided by the same. I have with me Ms. Dawn Adams, who's a planner with our board. She has actually prepared a presentation, and I would appreciate allowing Dawn to present that, and then I'll return for questions as you wish.
Ms. Adams?
Thank you.
And I presume there's no relationship?
No, there isn't. Coincidence. Thank you very much. Thank you for letting us come tonight, Mayor Daw and councilors. I'd like to share some background information, and it's a fantastic summary that you've done, Ms. Manhertz, of the history, and it is available to all residents to look on our board and our board documents and minutes, and then also take you through how schools are funded today and how our governance and funding works. If you can go, oh, it's here. In June 2006, the ministry announced replacement school funding, and this was an initiative that they had. It was replacement funding to address province-wide proportion of PTR, and that was the word they used, the term that they referred to schools that required over 65% of renewal dollars to more than 65% of renewal dollars to replace the value of the school. Dr. Williams was identified as a PTR school, and a feasibility study was initiated for its replacement. It contained two options: replacement on the site that it is now on Dunning, or on the Bayview Northeast site, as we had designated a site through a secondary plan process. In March, April 2007, part of the replacement strategy was that we had public meetings with each community, and we had 2 meetings with the Dr. Williams Secondary School community. In May 2007, we took back an information report that was presented to our trustees. And in June 2007, we heard that existing community concern was raised regarding the option of replacement on the Bayview Northeast site. We received a petition of 150 plus signatures to keep Dr. Williams on its site. And we also had 13 delegations at that time, including the former mayor, Phyllis Morris, and former councillors Stephen Granger and Bob McRoberts. It was a very emotional time for the community and for councillors as well regarding this issue. In July 2007, our trustees deferred replacement to the decision of the fall of 2007, and worked with the community and discussed options that were available to them. And in October 2007, the resolution that was approved by our trustees was that Dr. G.W. Williams School remain in operation at its present location, pending further clarification regarding the timing of phasing of new residential development and ministry funding. And that staff be authorized to purchase the Bayview Northeast Secondary School site at the expiration of the current option agreement. We did purchase that site. We purchased it in July 2008. It is located north of Wellington, just east of Bayview Avenue. Here's just a visual for you. It's just on the northwest of Hartman Public School, and we do retain ownership at this time. How schools are funded today. So that was an initiative through many years ago, about 10 years ago, for replacement funding. The board or the ministry has funding now called capital priorities, and it's basically growth funding or it's consolidation funding. Every year we prepare as board staff a capital strategy for new pupil places, for new schools and additions, and it's a 5-year rolling capital strategy. We release it each spring for trustees to review and approve. It's based on enrollment projections of development in areas, and it's focused on planning areas across the regions as we reflect 9 municipalities. The board submits applications to the ministry on a case-by-case basis. It's very different now. We need to prepare a business case. We need to focus on the long-term needs of pupil accommodation. We need to also include data of all the surrounding schools, their enrollment projections, their utilization, and existing and use of future portables. This is our last capital submission to the ministry. We submitted 6 business cases. 1 was funded, and it's Cathedral number 2, and it will be opening in 2018. The last secondary school that was funded, which will be opening this fall in 2017, is in Markham. It's the unnamed Cornell. The business case the successful business case, we had applied twice, had a utilization requirement for the areas, all the schools included in the business case, of 149%. The ministry wants to see substantial need for the school. They want the students in place, and they just don't depend on development at this time. Stouffville Southeast, which is also one that's recently opening, that will be opening this fall, we applied 2 times for that business case, and we had 159 for an elementary school. It's very different times. We are a board that has gone through a large growth for many years, and we are still growing, but at a much lesser rate. In regards to Dr. Williams, yes, the current enrollment is 658. Its available pupil places has supported the adding of holding due to new development, and that's at the southeast corner of Yonge and Bloomington in Oak Ridges. We've created a local secondary gifted program for students coming out of Wellington Public School, and we are adding the IB program. The impact of a new program, as we tend to grow our programs, take in students only for the intake of grade 9, and then we grow it grade by grade. Potentially, if the program is successful, we hope to add just under 500 students to the school. This is an initiative, the IB program, which is the International Baccalaureate Program, is a region-wide expansion. We are opening, in addition to our existing site at Bayview Secondary School in Richmond Hill, we are opening 4 additional programs this fall. This initiative of expanding IB took a fair time to get trustee approval, and we had always earmarked in our mind that Dr. Williams would be a wonderful site for it. So we will continue to monitor enrollment on an annual basis as the program is initiated. We've had it is application-based, and we've had a very successful application interest in the Dr. Williams site. Acceptances will go out in January, and we'll know the final number that will be going into the school for next fall. Transportation has been mentioned by the community, and the board does have a policy that secondary students are not eligible for public transit if they live within an area serviced by YRT, and Aurora is considered such an area. We're fortunate that we have a school bus special that serves the Bayview Northeast area. You refer to it as Aurora East, we refer to it as the Bayview Northeast area. And many schools in the YRDSB do utilize public transit, or students do need to utilize public transit. Let's go back here. What we'd like to point out is we have many urban schools like Langstaff, Richmond Hill, Richmond Green, that do have significant number of students. One of them actually has 50% of their population having to take YRT. And these students reside over 5 kilometers away. Is it ideal? It is not. But it is the goal of our board to have community walking schools as much as we can for our elementary students. For secondary, you need a number of our elementary schools to feed it, to be viable, to be sustainable, and students do travel at the secondary panel. What we have done to date is we have met with parents who've requested who reside in the Bayview Northeast area to share this same information. We've had multiple conversations with parents. We've spoken directly with some of you as the counselors and also with the mayor. We will continue to communicate as required. We will continue to monitor enrollment and development, and we will continue to spend renewal funds at Dr. G.W. Williams. So at this time, as the board, we do not feel we have a sufficient business case, because if you combine both the Aurora High School and Dr. G.W. Williams combined, we'd be at 87% utilization. As I said earlier, the most recent school that was approved by the ministry had to have a utilization approximate of 149% between the 2 schools, which requires portables and so forth. We are not our jurisdiction that can tax. We cannot raise our own funds. Thus, all our funding comes from the Ministry of Education, and this is the process that they ask that we apply. you know, at this point in 2008, when we purchased Bayview Northview site, and that the board still owns it and has no intention of releasing that site, it's a good news story as best as we can do. We would not receive funding from the ministry for a school to build a third school. Right now, we need 2 schools. Replacement funding is no longer an option to us. It is a growth mode at this moment, and we will monitor it and continue to try to keep the school viable. You don't have any other questions? Trustee Peter,
Thank you.
Okay, you want to come back?
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Adams, do you have anything else to add, or we'll just?
No,
ask
for myself, that was very well. I do apologize. I forgot to introduce Sonia Meehan. She's a representative of our staff as well.
Thank you. Don't go away.
Do you have any questions from the councilors?
Council, first of all, motion to receive the presentation, please. Councilors Maracus and Gartner. Comments or questions for either of the Adams? Councilor Gartner.
So according to the new policy, you're not looking, the board is not looking at the development numbers. The students have to be in place before a new school will be considered?
That is, through you, Mr. Mayor, that is not a policy. That is how the ministry is using its resources. It wants to have students in existence prior to the approval. That is not a policy they have. In terms of looking at the needs across the province every year, they have more requests for schools than they have dollars, and they look to make sure that the schools that they are building are for students in existence. If there are instances for holding, they utilize those first. You'll see in the last 2 years that we've only, as a board, received funding for 1 school because they know we can survive in holding. The Stouffville Southeast School that is opening, historically, we used to be able to open a new school, an elementary school, with about half the enrollment and the rest based on development. When I open the Stouffville Southeast School this fall, I have more than 100% of the capacity of the school going in. It's very different from what it used to be years ago.
Thank you. But from what you said, the students have to be in place. By the time the school would be built, those students would be gone.
I'm sorry, could you clarify? From
Well,
what
if-
I've
if
said,
Students have to be in place, but by the time a school would be built, those students would be gone, so they would not be served. It would be the younger ones coming up that would be served.
correct. To design, take a school through site plan approval and construct for a high school, it's typically 4 years.
So the students that are, if there's enough students in place to build the school, maybe there won't be enough students following them to fully populate the school. I understand what you said, but to me, it just doesn't make sense.
Councilor Thompson.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. You know, as a planner, I'm sure you can appreciate the fact that we're always trying to look forward. When we look at the community, we have 10-year asset management plans. We have an official plan. We go through planning exercises ourselves, and we try and look at the long-range development of our community. You know, one of the conversations we have around the table has to do with the interchange at St. John's and the 404, and while it's not there, we certainly feel there will be a need at some point, and so, you know, you plan forward. So same thing, I guess, with regards to the school. While I hear that you have a 5-year plan, you must have some projections when you look at the growth that's happening in the Leslie area, as well as the population projections for Aurora. You must have some idea when that utilization rate will be reached. So, I mean, as a best estimate, when, as the delegate asked this evening, you know, how long do they have to wait until that threshold will be met?
So with the introduction of IB at Dr. Williams, and if it is successful, we see the school reaching 100% capacity within 7 years. We know there is further development, but further development changes timelines, and we understand the Magna lines may be sold one day. So we monitor it on a yearly basis because things are constantly changing. We are circulated every development application. We watch them to see if they're approved. We phase it in. We're constantly monitoring and changing our projections as things change. So yes, we look beyond 5 years. We are constantly looking ahead and looking 10 years and out as we designate sites for new development areas. But we are also restricted in terms of the capital of how we build our schools. It is from a central pot down at the ministry, and we apply where we can. But we are looking, we have a site. We are not ready to release that site yet. It is a good news story in terms of there is hope. We need students, though, to attend our schools. They are walking to the Catholic school, and across the region, we have this reciprocal relationship in other areas where we take more of the Catholic students from the feeders and vice versa. And this is an area where they had funding approved, and they were able to build Maximilian Kolbe, and we are still waiting. So students are attending a third high school in Aurora. It's just a Catholic high school. So the ministry looks at all data, both Catholic and public. In our business case, we present public data, but they look at all.
And I appreciate that, and I recognize the fact that all you can do is put forward the business case to the ministry, and at the end of the day, they fund it. But again, trying to narrow it down, do you foresee the board putting forward a business case in the next 10 years to justify the existence of a high school at the Bayview site?
So the trends right now to the Bayview Northeast area are that we are losing a lot of students from our feeder schools, and they are leaving to go to the Catholic board or other schools. If those trends do not change and IB is successful, I see both schools, Aurora High School and Williams, as being full and viable, but I do not see a need yet. We need to see a change in having, people ask what they can do to have a school. It's attend a public school. We need to have the students.
Councillor, excuse me, please. Councillor Abel, Councillor Marcus.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I'm trying to understand what you're giving to us, and it doesn't really make any sense to me. So you have to have the students in place, and we made a decision in 2007 to reverse rebuilding, I think you call it an RTP, prohibited to repair.
Correct.
So now you've made that decision in 2007. Now we have to sort of figure out how we're going to make that work, because enrollment is down. And you're going to create an Ivy school. And you project that that attendance will be making 500 in a number of years. So you're telling me that you can't build a school because it has to be 100%, yet you are feeding into G.W. Williams, and it's less than 100%. So that's what doesn't make sense to me. Our community is suffering from a reversal of a decision that was made based on your priorities back in 2007. And we're trying to correct that. When we look at the Ministry of Education, they talk about well-being, and well-being is about the students. Not about what the board has done and how they're going to fix it and do that. We're talking about our community and our children. So I think it's important that that's how I see it as a counselor. You've got all this building. You've got 3 schools there, and if you build that high school, all the students will be able to walk. But now you have made a decision back in 2007, and I think it was an incorrect decision, but it was a decision made, and you're going to try and build that by drawing into an Ivy League while everyone else in our community suffers. The feeder school to G.W. Williams is one of them is Highland Glen, and it's actually closer for the students to go to Aurora High. So I logically...
Do you mean Highview Public School?
Highview, thank you. So logically, common sense just tells you 2 schools, one on one side and one on the other, and everyone walks. And that's what we try and what we think we should be doing here. And you're telling us why that can't be done.
Correct.
And I think that that's a wrong approach. Why not have the Ivy School at the new school on Bayview? Then everyone's happy.
So as I try to clarify how our schools are funded, I would not be given funding to build a new school on Bayview. No one's disputing that we would like a school on Bayview. No one disputes back in 2007 that planners and the board suggested that the population was shifting to the Bayview Northeast area. It was a highly emotional time for the councillors, for the mayor. We were lobbied by the community. You can't go back and change that decision. It is what it is. We can't as a board raise money to build a new school. I'm just explaining to you how our schools are funded today.
I'm sort of cognizant of that. We'll learn more about how schools are funded and how the boards make those decisions. I think what's important is what Mr. Adams had suggested, is that you will allow the residents to delegate at the board so that the board can hear it all.
We'd be pleased.
So that's step one. The studies that are done for your decisions could be redone, reevaluated, and perhaps there might be a business case going forward for funding along those lines.
The ministry doesn't look at those issues for business cases. The ministry looks on pupil places, filling them, sustainable, and it ensures that it wants to have over 100% utilization before they will consider it. No one's disputing that it's good to have a local school. Our priority, and the ministry supports it, is to have local elementary schools. Secondary schools, by default, because it serves larger areas, means students don't necessarily can walk to school. But we, again, do not have the tax base to raise the funds to do this. We would apply to the ministry.
The tax base is from that part of the community has put in funding that would naturally fund a school. So I see the funding as being available there from what we've contributed. And I think that Aurora, if it needs 2 schools, one on each side, for what they're contributing into the tax base, should at least have a funding model that looks that way. What is going against it, working against it, is the plan that you have going in G.W. Williams, which is an Ivy League that is less than 100%. So I'm just having trouble understanding how the funding priority for a school that's less than 100% takes precedent over the demand for the well-being of our school and our community overall. And I think it's valuable listening to what you have to say so that we can sort of make appropriate presentation on how to point out what logically should take place. So I can see where the mindset is and the commitment that has been made. However, I think when we think on the long term, 50 years, when you look at a build-out in Aurora, in the long term, common sense says that one should be on one side and the other should be on the other side. And the fact that something was done and decided in 2007 and that you have tried to justify that by creating an Ivy League puts a great burden on our community, because now we have traffic problems, we're not considering the children and all those aspects of what the ministry outlines as the well-being and engagement with the community, engagement with the students, engagement with the businesses, et cetera, very clear. That has come into place since you've made that decision and since you've made that commitment to try and get that enrollment up in G.W. Williams. So I think it's very valuable having listened, and then we can see why there is a problem going forward. And it's quite clear. I can see we have to be able to present to change that mindset at the board.
Thank you for your comments.
Councilor Maracas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. You mentioned about the business cases and that you put them forward, and that's the new way to look at funding from the
Correct.
province. You also mentioned that the successful business case that was accepted was it their second time that it was put forward? Or was
Yes, sometimes we have to submit multiple times.
So then I guess my question is wouldn't it make sense to create a business case for this school and put it forward, considering it seems that most aren't successful on the first attempt, and that way we can get the ball rolling, in essence?
Every business case that was submitted in 2016 had schools with utilizations in the areas under the business case of over 120 or higher. So our board would not, our trustees would not support submitting a business case that did not have even 100% utilization. It would not be successful.
And I appreciate and I hear you saying it's not going to be successful, but considering, I'm hearing that they're not necessarily successful on the first attempt. I just feel that considering that the residents and I think the majority of council agree that the school on the Bayview side would be sustainable and that there is sufficient enrollment numbers that would be able to carry the school forward, that it would make sense to create that business case, to put it forward for a first attempt, to at least put it on the radar for the province to look at. And I think that, from my point of view, that makes sense. That makes perfect business sense to do and to get that ball rolling. But, I mean, I appreciate the situation that you guys are in, but, you know, at the end of the day, I do think it's a flawed system. As Councillor Gardner mentioned, you know, and Councillor Abel, if we're not going to build a school until there's sufficient, like, the children are out of age to be there, well, then that doesn't make sense, because by the time the school's built, they'll be gone. And there won't be any students for that school. So we'll be back in the same, you're building a school for nobody then. So, you know, it's a flawed system, I guess, at the end of the day. But I just think that maybe the best case scenario is to build that business case, put it forward for a first attempt, and put it on the radar for the province to look at. And I hope you take those comments and put it forward.
I'll take them back to our trustees. Thank you.
Councillor Kim? Councillor Humphries?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you both for coming out. You know, I've heard multiple times, you know, business case, and I relate business case with numbers. And we all know that numbers are critical and important. But, you know, when I look at and I read the board site and the responsibilities of the board, this is the order of their responsibilities. Promote student achievement and well-being, deliver effective and appropriate educational programs, develop, maintain, and monitor effectiveness of board policies, develop, communicate, and review the multi-year plan, monitor the performance of the Director of Education, practice responsible stewardship of board resources. And so, you know, what was striking was that responsible stewardship of board resources, you know, I liken that to finances, and that's, it may not be in the order of importance, but it doesn't surprise me that if you're a Board of Education, then education and the well-being of students are critical. But what I heard tonight so far is that the business case seems to reign supreme. So I have a question with that, and with regard to the process, I think we need to reprioritize, you know, what truly is important, because we may be overspending a few million here or there, but the value of an education and value of several thousand students, high school students going to the workforce, preparing for university and other careers, you know, they produce, you know, 1,000 times more than what we put in. And so, you know, I would submit that, you know, I think the business case, as important as it is, it may be overrated in this case. So a few questions here. The first one is, we talked about the business case, we talked about the number of schools. Is there any way that we can redraw the boundaries so that we can have a school on the west, school on the east, and just redraw it so that one school won't be overpopulated and that there will be a balance on both sides?
So you're talking, could we change boundaries to balance the enrollment to Williams and Aurora High?
No, to Bayview and Aurora High.
Bayview doesn't exist, so I can't change that boundary at this time.
Well, that's why I'm suggesting that that might be a good case to have a school on Bayview so that you can kind of right the equilibrium, because right now the scale is tipped over on one side and there's lack of servicing on the other. And unfortunately, you know, the municipality, we try to balance the scales in all respects, but this is one area that we have no control over. And so, hence the question, you know, can that be an argument to...
To the ministry?
Yes.
As a board, we have no control over what priority school or what schools they fund for us. It's on a business case basis, and that is the process. So I'm just clarifying the process. We can put forward a business case. I will take that comment back to our trustees. But we also have priorities in terms of holding and ensuring that students can attend a school and get an education. And such a business case would be a lower priority for our board. We cannot propose that students will come back. The ministry expects and demands that we show existing schools, students attending a school. So we will take all this information back. We appreciate your comments, but that is the process that we're mandated to follow by our ministry.
Thank you. And you've mentioned the ministry. So my understanding is that this is solely a decision for the board, and the ministry cannot counteract anything the board's decision. So can you clarify that, please?
So we do operate our board, but our funding for operating the board comes from the ministry. We do report to the ministry. We have to comply with their policies and regulations. School board funding for new capital is strictly from the ministry. It is not a pot that we have sitting or can access and choose what we wish to build. We have to apply. The resources then come once they are approved from the ministry. So they have many controls over every board in Ontario.
Back in 2008 or 2009, I believe the board put in 12 million or something to that effect. And perhaps you can specify in terms of the actual amount. Does the board consider the payback period for an investment, or so that can we wait this out, that if the payback, like most businesses, is about 7 years, do we need to just wait 7 years, which is, I think it's already passed then.
So the board has put money into Williams. It has lowered the what used to be called a PTR, they now call a facility condition index, and it has been reduced down to 34%, which is quite acceptable for a school of that vintage and other schools in the region that operate. Again, the ministry would not fund the school unless students, there was a definite need of students needing to attend. We do look at things from a business perspective in terms of payout and sustainability, but again, we come back to the business case that I have to have the students.
Okay, and sorry, how much was the amount that was invested back in?
$12 million, and we continue to put money into the school.
So it seems that, from what I understand, if all the students in the eastern portion of Aurora attends G.W. Williams, we're looking at about 60% from the Bayview side and 40% from west of Yonge. Is that not convincing numbers to relocate?
Not to the ministry. They want the students in our board.
How long will the board hold on to the lot on Bayview then?
At this time, we have no plans to release it. We are still monitoring it. We know there will be future development in Aurora, so our immediate 5-year to 10-year is that we are keeping the site and monitoring development.
Okay, thank you. Now, I know a lot of parents that are sending their students to the Catholic School Board.
Correct.
I'm considering the same thing because I'm not happy with the options that are available. So do you keep track of or take into consideration the enrollment for the Catholic School Board?
We don't take into consideration. We meet yearly with the Catholic School Board and review who's attending where, or what feeders from the public board have gone to the Catholic and vice versa. As I mentioned earlier, this happens across the region. We see much more shopping of secondary schools than we've ever seen before. A lot is location, a lot is program, a lot is perception. At the secondary panels, students switch boards for their own personal pathways.
Councillor?
Yeah. It seems there's a trend here that I'm hearing about. A lot of it seems to be about numbers. Now, if another entity wanted to purchase And I'm not saying that that's my personal desire, but if someone were to want to purchase Williams, is there a price that the board would say, yeah, that would make a good business case, and this would provide an impetus for us to make the transaction?
So if the board releases or sells property, it has to follow Regulation 44498, and it has to be offered to other school boards first, municipalities, and then if no one's interested, the board first of all has to declare it surplus. If we have a school that's operating, we'd be loath to declare it surplus, but we'd be open to anyone coming to speak to us, but there are policies and regulations that we must follow. We also have guidelines on what can be accepted and spent through the ministry. So we have had people come forward, and not on this issue, on other issues, but it is a long process, but it is nothing that we wouldn't consider.
Sorry, I forgot your name and
It's Dawn Adams.
Donna. Oh, and you're from the planning department?
I'm originally in the planning department. I'm the senior manager of school and system operations.
Okay. So what would it take then, business case or otherwise, what would it take to move forward with a school construction in Bayview?
From the board perspective of the ministry funding the school, I would need to have students over 100% capacity at Williams, at Aurora High School. I would apply for a business case to the ministry, knowing that there's development to keep the school sustainable, because that is what they look at, and to, look at the other schools, the elementary feeders that are feeding it. We are far from that at this point. It doesn't mean it won't happen in the future, but we are far from that at this point.
Does the board take into consideration the costs to the residents when they have to, like you said, school buses don't run here, and so won't run students from the east end to Williams? Do they? I guess they don't take into consideration the amount of dollars that families have to undertake to transport the children over there.
So we have a policy where secondary students aren't transported. Again, it's our stewardship of resources. And we do transportation at the elementary panel. We have a policy for walking, but at secondary, this is the policy that we follow from staff perspective.
And Dawn, my last question.
No? Happy to answer your questions.
So pupil accommodation review process.
Correct.
What will it take, or is that feasible for the residents here in East Aurora to initiate that process?
So the residents don't initiate. That would be a board initiative. If we felt that we had spaces for the students that are in Williams, if we wanted to close Williams, that could be in existing schools. The ministry does not use the PAR, the pupil accommodation process, to generate funding to move a school. That's replacement funding. There are no initiatives for replacement funding for building a new school in an existing boundary at this time. A PAR is a board initiative where we have, there are a number of factors that must be met, but at this point, the board plan for Dr. Williams is to introduce the International Baccalaureate program, and if that is not successful, we are monitoring and have other options ahead of us in the future.
And just my last comment, not necessarily a question, but you can answer if you wish. I find that a school that's half full, it's what's the word? It's deflating. And I would imagine whether it be staff or students, it's kind of deflating when your school is half full. And I can't imagine, and I have to imagine that that has to have an impact on the quality of the education. And even though there's a thrust towards enrichment programs and other specialty programs, when you don't have a full school and you can't roll out a full sporting team or chess team or some kind of academic team, and your school's not even on the map from an academic perspective. And so I think, as Councillor Maracas said, it's kind of a flawed system when you're just waiting for people to come. But at the same time, if you're a shop owner and you're GW Williams and you're half full, it's hard to entice people to buy something when your shelves are only 2 items full. And I would submit that if you build a school in Bayview and it's full, and I have no doubt it will be, that would just increase, that would make the business case, that would increase the educational, standards, the quality, the environment. So, I just hope that, if you guys can take back to the board, to the director, that there is a business case here. It may not be a financial one in the short term, but I think long-term or midterm that there is a case to be made. Thank you very much.
May I ask a question back to the counselor?
I was going to just suggest, would you like to sit down?
No, I'm fine, thank you, though. Have you been to Dr. Williams, sir?
Yes, I have.
Good. If you've been there, and I've been there recently and seen the renovations in the school, the new contact room, the new weight room, the retrofit, it's a beautiful building, and it's a really an energized building. We have great staff there. We have a great administrative team. It doesn't have that atmosphere. There is a fear perception of that, but I would invite every counselor to please, we'd happily arrange a tour.
Yeah, there's a, I'm not suggesting to close down GW Williams. I would love to have a third school. All I'm saying, but to that point, there's a hospital on 401 in Kiel that's fantastic. It's well lit, well equipped, but it's half full as well.
Councillor Kim, Councillor Humphries.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My apologies for being late tonight. Sorry about that. Couldn't be helped, but thank you for coming. I appreciate it very much, and to the parents and residents here. You're hearing what we're saying. We love Williams. We want a school in an area where it's up and coming, it's growing, lots of students, easy to get to school, walk to school. That's sort of the wish. It is the wish of the parents, and it would be the ideal situation for us as counselors as we hear this all the time now. I love Williams. It's a beautiful school, and I love the work you've done to it. An IB school is amazing to have, and hopefully we'll get that 100% enrollment. But the idea is for me, is to keep that school, but let's add a third school if that's possible. And one of the things we bounced around here, and I don't even know, from a business perspective, there's numbers, there's, you have to meet our criteria, you have to have 100% full schools, and then maybe we get a third school. Has there been any consideration, and this is a very unique situation because of what happened in the past, right? The school board wanted to move and have a school at Bayview, but at the time, 7-8 years ago, there was a very powerful will to keep it as is. And the good news is the school board still purchased the land, still has the land. So it looks like there's a vision to have a school there. Thing is the timing. When is that going to happen? When is that sweet spot going to happen that you got the residents, you got the full schools, now we get to build? And this is really probably a waiting game in terms of how the board looks at business plan, at business progress, and we're just hoping to get it done sooner somehow, maybe not at the 100% mark, but at a good enough approach that there would be a consideration. It doesn't sound too promising in terms of many turned down at 100% schools to get what we want, but wondering about all the great work done at Williams. Has there been any thought process, and maybe there's something to go back and think about, and to utilize Williams absolutely as an IB school, special programming, but is there any way that we can take a section of that school and use it for other educational programming, maybe not necessarily the traditional grade 9 to 12, and think about that in terms of how well that could be utilized while perhaps building a school at Bayview. And what comes to mind is a lot of schools in Toronto are facing the same thing. Some are half empty, and and some are over capacity. And how do we? So I noticed that they've been doing a lot of programming, like they call it neighborhood doorsteps or something, where they have children programs at half the school. Very good, really great programs, fantastic for the tiny tots before grade school. And I see this happening more often. Is there any possibility of looking at the school and saying, Williams, we have retrofit, it's a beautiful school. Can we use a part of it for other types of learning, fully utilizing it, and perhaps like tipping that scale so we get that school built at Bayview? Really, that's the hope here, and don't know if that's a consideration, if that's just like, forget it, door shut in our face, but is there any kind of that thought process?
So you're referring to more of something called a community hub. And the York Region District School Board has a long relationship of having partners in the school that work very well. We have childcare in almost all our elementary schools. We have networks with student services, which is serving students with high needs. So we have that relationship. When you create a community hub, is typically at the point beyond that where you declare a school surplus, and we're not at that point. We are talking with the ministry on a constant basis about the future. We are not a board like Toronto where we have potentially, multiple schools to close. We're very fortunate of a board, and it is very fortunate because we know community, a local school is important, and we focus on our elementary schools. Our secondary, again, it serves a wide area. Are we at the point to look at that for Williams? No, we're not, because we're introducing the new program. In the future, as the expansion and acceptance of community hubs and understanding who funds them, how they work and so forth, levels and levels of issues to resolve, that might be something to consider down the road. But at this time, the ministry, and I'll take everything you've said back to our board, would not fund a new school of $35 million based on the hope of retrofitting and filling a school to cover its cost.
Yeah, I understand. I understand the challenges for sure. I mean, kind of hoping that
There's a hope,
there's a
absolutely.
hope, right? And I'm very happy and proud that our schools are staying open and being utilized, and we could be proud of all our schools for sure. I'm thrilled with them. Again, just the need of that certain. Hey, just a quick question.
Absolutely.
See, I'm talking to myself here. As you're thinking, you have to have pupils to fill the schools for sure. Is there any thought at looking at the grade schools coming up and building in future, or does it have to be at that grade 9 to 13 age group?
Our board hasn't looked at having a JK to 12 school. Other boards are playing with that now as they close schools across the province and wrestle with the issue of keeping schools sustainable. If you take students from the elementary panel and move them into Dr. Williams to fill the school, you empty out elementary schools and you lead to potential closures of elementary schools. Aurora is a very interesting city at this time. You have a west side that is well developed and you have an east side that is newly developed. And we had the closure years ago of Wells for various reasons, and we've been repurposing our elementary schools with new programs like the primary dual track to make sure that we don't have closures. This is something our board does not look happily towards doing. So if you rob from Peter to pay Paul, you're taking students and shifting them. We need new students at Dr. Williams. It is difficult for the students from the Bayview Northeast area to get there. There is a school bus special that we're asking them no different than we ask other schools in the area that also have to take school bus specials or take 2 transfers to school. But that is what the ministry looks for. I don't argue with any of the comments I've heard tonight. We would love to have a school in the east side of Bayview, but this is how we would get funding for it.
Okay, thank you. And I was kind of really referring to the kids, sorry, I appreciate that because I wanted to understand. I meant if their children right now in grade school and they're going to be in grade 9 in 8 years, can you look at those numbers and think, oh, in 8 years, these kids need to find a school, so we should build it now in time for those kids? Or is that just not a way to look at?
That's how business cases used to be looked at in terms
Okay.
of development and so forth. The ministry does not have the funds. They have limited funds at this point, and they are looking for more dire cases. They need the students. We historically and always do build in our cases, the feeder schools coming up, and then it reflects in our long-term projections. But as again, the ministry has limited resources, and they will put it where actual students are.
Okay, thank you. I understand things have changed, and it's more of a who needs it the most. Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, I think we'd all love to see that third school, keep Williams, get that brand new school, keep Aurora High, and I think we have enough residents building and build out there. Sooner or later, we're going to be at 100%. I'm hoping sooner.
I hope so. I
And
absolutely
maybe
do.
the projections will show that Williams in the next couple of years and Aurora High are at 100. Is Aurora High at 100% just yet?
Aurora High is just over capacity. It's operating about 120%.
Okay. So now with that, can we balance that with Williams?
If you
Seems
add
fair.
both schools together, They have a share capacity or utilization of 87%. So we don't have the numbers yet.
But close.
To get a new business case, I would need both schools to be over capacity, and that the areas, they would also take in Newmarket High, they would take in Dr. Mulock. They expect students at the secondary panel to travel, and they want all our schools full before they fund new pupil places.
Okay, so if we're at 87%, that IB program, potentially by end of January, we should have that
Those
in
are the
school?
acceptances. It is an applicant program. Students
Okay.
had to apply, do a questionnaire and a test. The results of their applications notices will be sent out. We had very happy interest in the Williams site. We have great hopes, but we grow our program. So hopefully the first year we'll have multiple classes, and the second year we'll add another grade. So you won't see the full impact for 4 to 6 years.
Okay. So I was hoping that would draw a lot and have, because I do know a lot of students in Aurora are going to IB schools in Richmond Hill right now.
Absolutely, it's a need out there in the system, and we're happy to be
So this is the
expanding.
first school in York, in our area? In
No, we
Aurora?
have one in Richmond Hill, Bayview
But in
Secondary.
Aurora?
In Aurora, absolutely it is.
Okay.
In the public board.
Perfect. So if we get that done, January? February?
January is when we send the acceptances out. The program, the incoming students in grade 9 would be this September,
Okay.
September 2017.
Okay, so that's good news, because if we get some crazy outrageous numbers, we can get to that 100% and over, and maybe the business case will be sooner than later.
That's
Keep
what
our
we're
fingers
hoping.
crossed.
That's what
So
we're
everybody
hoping.
send your kids to Williams, and then we'll get a school on the east end.
Correct.
Thank you, Councillor Humphreys. Thank you, Dawn and Peter, for coming out. You can obviously sense the frustration of our council. I can sense your frustration, and certainly the residents, because it seems very much like a catch-22 situation, where we can't build a school until we have students, but we won't get the students if we really can't put a building there and attract people to live in the area. So I just want to make sure that I'm fully aware or fully understand. So the funding, the process for funding the capital for a new building is strictly with the ministry, is that correct?
Correct.
And the ministry is looking, will only consider a business case to fund a new building if the current schools are at 100 or plus %.
That's correct.
And so I know that Aurora High is over and Williams is under. So, and you said 87% for the two schools?
Between the two schools, the average of the two is 87.
Now, your 2015-2019 capital plan, I believe the 2019 number predicts a 92% occupancy rate.
For which school?
Just Aurora. It was just the Aurora.
For secondary, so that would be the average,
Yeah.
yes.
So that's, you don't see that increasing much, obviously, between now and then. With the new census that was done, will you be re-looking at those numbers come 2000, when the census is released in 2017? Will you be re-looking at those numbers?
We look at those numbers on an annual basis. Every October, we get current data. We have the best data in essence because it's current, it's students attending the school. We update our projections on a yearly basis. So we're monitoring. The projections that you see there now reflect the trend of the students coming from the Bayview Northeast area at its rate that it is. We hope to see a shift with the introduction of the program and the IB program, but those numbers are updated annually. We don't wait for a census. We do a full report and release it every 3 years on the web, but in the spring of every year, we have a new full capital review for our trustees.
Thank you. If we wanted to somehow change the process, we really need to be speaking with the Ministry of Education. Is that correct? Is that
In regards to funding for a new school, correct.
they should be the next one we invite to chat, quite frankly. Because it's very, so you operate, they build. Is that,
They fund.
yeah, okay, sorry. They fund. So that is a frustrating situation because they, and certainly, Councillor Thompson mentioned, we've been encouraging the construction of an interchange at St. John's and the 404 because the growth in the area has been predicted for years, but they wait until the traffic's there and then they think about it. And that situation is certainly very frustrating for us as well. And I do lobby the Ministry of Transportation on a regular basis, so I guess we need to add the Ministry of Education to that whole process as well. Thank you. Is there any second questions for the Councillor Abel? Councillor Gardner? Councillor?
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. How many students do we lose to the Catholic School Board?
It depends on what school, in what area. Are you talking about the Williams area?
I'm talking about students that should be coming out of the catchment area of the 2Cs, Bayview area.
Of the Bayview area?
Those that should be in a public, how many of those are instead going to the Catholic?
So at this point, the schools in the Bayview area are very young, very primary based, so their lower grades are heavier than their higher grades. We are retaining about 40% of our students right now on average from that area.
So I don't understand your response. I'm asking how many go to the Catholic, and you're telling me 40%?
I'm saying that we retain 40% of the grade 8 feeders out of Bayview Northeast area.
So 60% are not going to a public school?
60% could be going to Maximilian or could be going to other private schools or other YRDSB schools. But to the geographic boundary that should be going to Williams, we are retaining approximately 40%.
Does that seem high or low? Or?
We see this phenomena in other areas of the region as well. We see overall between the Catholic board and the public board, the public always attracts more students away from the Catholic board, but depending on the area of the region and the location of the school and the perception of the school and reputation, we have areas where we gain students from the Catholic board and we have areas where we lose students more to the Catholic board.
What would be the same question going to Aurora High?
Aurora High, it's between the 80 and 90% mark that we retain. It's higher. Absolutely, it is higher. No one's questioning or doubting that
So
this
that's,
phenomena.
That's probably due to the boundary.
And
you're not gonna
location,
change,
correct.
you can't change the boundary, of course, because you haven't built the school there.
Correct.
So the October 2016 York Region District School Board numbers have not been posted online yet.
No, until they're finalized and they're edited, they will not be released to the public. They have been sent to the ministry. They should be out shortly before December.
They're usually out by now. They're not this year.
Not necessarily.
The grade 9 enrollment at Williams is 9%.
Is 9% at the school?
Yes.
Okay.
I would think it would be higher.
We would hope it would be higher, correct.
So it looks like instead of more people coming in from the feeder schools, it's actually alarmingly low.
Correct.
A lot of people say that the school budget is based on enrollment.
There is an operating budget that every school has in terms of enrollment that the principals have, but there is also a budget per each school. So yes, it does reflect the enrollment of the school.
So if you are below enrollment, then you won't have the budget capacity that other schools at full enrollment, like say at Aurora High.
There may not be the synergy of that generates a certain budget, correct?
And is there a balance of funds earmarked for Williams?
In terms of capital renewal,
Yes.
there is a
In your-
plan for every school in our board in spending money. We are spending renewal dollars on Williams on a yearly basis. There is, if you go back to the 2007 recap, which is now called the Facility Condition Index, it identified 22 million was required. We have spent 12, and we are upgrading and constantly spending. But a school of that vintage, like a school in Richmond Hill, Langstaff, has the same, similar, in a school in Newmarket, Huron Heights of that vintage, we are constantly spending dollars on the school. So it's
So-
very similar to other schools in the region.
If you have earmarked 22 million back in 2007, and you spent 12 to date, would I assume there's a balance of 10 million?
But it's not a balance, it's constantly reviewed. It's a good estimate to have, but that's over a 10-year period.
And do you have any, could you tell us where that money is going to?
What that money went to, or the future money's going to?
What the future money's going to?
We'd have to work with our plant department to have them tell us what's in their 5-year plan. We know we did the major heating systems of the original building. They were replaced, and lighting was replaced, windows were replaced, roofing was replaced.
You did a new boundary in 2007? Is that when you did the existing boundary?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. In terms of changing it, to what regard?
Well, you did change the boundary, so I'm just wondering how often would you review boundaries?
Boundaries are also reviewed on an annual basis where required. If a new school is opening, we create a boundary or we tweak it. If schools are struggling with enrollment, sometimes of new development, we tweak it. Most of our boundaries are set at this point. Unless there's a need or a change of program or a movement of program, we don't change the boundaries. But we review them, or the need to review them, on an annual basis.
And would a first step moving forward be a pupil accommodation review, as Councillor Kim had mentioned?
That is not something the public can request. That is initiated from the school board. And at this time, I don't feel our trustees or staff feel there's a need to initiate it now that we're starting the new implementation of the IB program.
But you do take direction from the board if they vote on a matter?
Correct.
But you would be advising them not to at this time?
At this time, no, I would not advise them.
Okay. Well, it helps me sort of see where the challenge is.
That's
and
okay.
That's what this process is all about. So I can't thank you enough for bringing it very straightforward. It's kind of a catch-22. You're committed to funding and seeing a school that is less than 100%, but you will not consider moving boundaries or building a third school because it's less than 100%. So that's the part that doesn't make sense to me.
So the funding, I can understand your misunderstanding. The boundary, if I change a boundary, it's a domino effect. It changes another school, and parents aren't necessarily happy of changing of boundaries. So I would be taking students from another area. Would they come is part of it, but there's no reason to initiate a boundary change. There are sufficient units. They're not attending to Williams, but at this time, I would not change the boundary of Richmond Hill High School or Newmarket High School or Sir William Mulock.
But based on the well-being, and Councillor Kim had mentioned it about sense of community, and this is all under the ministry. So we have what the ministry is telling for the well-being and engagement.
Correct.
And then we have to see how that, and it's obvious what we have here in our community, because it just makes sense. The challenge is working with you. So you're the intermediate. So we have to understand what it is. And I'm sort of getting it. It doesn't all make sense, but I'm sort of getting the gist of what it is our next steps are going to take and how we're best going to approach it. So I'm looking forward. We do seem to be able, and maybe I can ask Mr. Adams or yourself, that the residents can have a delegation at the board.
So I'll let Mr. Adams Lukowski answer that.
We would welcome that, and I would facilitate the arrangement of it with our trustee services department to have it put on an agenda at the appropriate time.
Because that was the understanding I got from the Ministry of Education, that the first step would be going to the board for delegation and seeking a pupil accommodation review. And I have a coach or someone who has to only tell me what the guidelines are. They can't take a side or anything, of course, and that was made very clear, but they can help understand the process. So that
would be the most productive way of going forward and addressing the entire board, as we have the whole council sitting with us tonight, except for Councillor Tom. That would be the way to go, because the questions aren't mine to answer alone, and it's not my decision. So that would be the appropriate.
Well, that's good, because the understanding I had is that the application for delegation may be refused by the board, but if you're indicating that...
Yeah, they could be but I would help facilitate the acceptance.
And that's all I
Because
can ask.
I don't disagree with anything that I've heard. We have realities we have to operate within. And I'm a business owner, and I understand that that without the money, you can't build the school. We have an existing building that's open, so to say that we're putting money into it is incorrect, because it's actually being used by students today. To take money and build another school, where would it come from? That's the question that I would raise, and our professional staff say that it's not available from the only source we have.
And I think that that's where the town has a role to play, is to come up with a solution that would satisfy the board as well as look after the concerns that are obvious to us. All us here can see the concerns that are obvious. So maybe there's a role for the town to play in what we're going to do with that property. And the Philadelphia was an excellent, there is always a way to look at options and what could be considered, and the town has a role to play in that.
Thank you.
I want to thank you very much.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you for all the information. It's really disheartening to us as a council to know that we don't hold much power, if any, to help our residents with legitimate concerns. But you did say something interesting about the Catholic School Board. Do you know what the enrollment is at St. Max and Cardinal Carter?
I looked at it earlier. Off the top of my head, it's about 450, and they have a capacity with 12 portables about 1,500. So they're just under capacity.
Is that
operating right
St.
now.
Max?
That's at St. Max.
Huh. So when all of this is being looked at, a certain number of portables are considered acceptable?
Absolutely. The ministry views it as temporary accommodation, and it is acceptable.
Thanks.
Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you both again for coming, and I hope you know that's as proxies for the population and our residents. It's part of our responsibility to ask the question that they wanted to ask, and so we totally understand as we have certain parameters that we work under. It's nice to know specifically what parameters that the board works under. So thank you very much for coming and answering all the questions. I like to waive procedural bylaw and ask that, we have a manageable amount here, and the public, the residents wanted to ask some questions, and I'd like to leave some time because there's been a lot of back and forth. I'm sure the residents here have some
I've
questions.
got other speakers on the list at
Yep.
this point.
But I would like to, put it out there that I'd like to give the residents an opportunity to have their say. This might be the last opportunity, perhaps, or it might not. But I'd like to give them the opportunity to ask some questions.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Humphries? Requires 2/3. All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. We're going to go through the list first, and if a resident wishes to answer a question, they'll come to the, I'll request that you two sit down. You will address the questions to me. I will put them to the, we're nothing if we're not procedurally oriented. But I'm going to go through my speakers first.
Absolutely.
Councillor Humphries.
One of my questions was answered about the school boards, the Catholic School Board enrollment, so a little bit under on there. No, you know what? I'll wait for the residents because but thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Just briefly, one of the questions brought forward by the delegate really was about, what steps can we take together to move this forward? We've already talked about the fact that it would be helpful to have them delegate at a future board meeting.
Board meeting, correct.
The mayor also mentioned, continued efforts to, whisper in the ears of the Ministry of Education with regards to the funding model. But, in your experience with other areas or other schools, are there other things that the residents, council, cooperatively we can do together to move this issue forward?
So I think everything that you've mentioned there is wonderful for the residents to do, and they should do. I have other areas that are doing just the same, who want a secondary school in an area of growth. And it doesn't, limit their need or their wish, and we wish we could have a school at Bayview. And the board did as much as it could based on the action of the time of 2007 by retaining the site. So in terms of the board, for me as a planner, it's a hopeful situation and we're monitoring it. In terms of what they can do, they can lobby the ministry, but it is what I'm laying out. I'm trying to be very transparent. This is what the ministry looks for.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
If I could ask, I was going to say Mr. and Mrs. Adams, that doesn't sound right.
Maybe sit over here.
Peter and Dawn, how's that? Yes, please. And there is the microphone there, there's a button on it. This is very irregular. We don't do this. So I just want to be very clear that we do enforce decorum. So I think last time we were all together, I said, just treat this like school. You know, one student speaks at a time. And I will address all the questions to Mr. Adams as the elected official. If Ms. Adams wishes to assist, that is fine, but all the questions will go to Mr. Adams. And if we get into repetition on questions, I will cut it off. So I suspect Ms. Manhurst would like to go first.
I have a few questions just for clarification, and then I may have a few others. Sorry. So it's my understanding that the ministry has funding dollars and is willing to spend $10 million on a school that's at 50% capacity, but isn't willing to spend $10 million on a new school. Is that correct?
Mr. Adams?
So is this on?
Can you use your
Oh,
microphone,
I'm
please?
sorry. That was to the mayor. Forgive me. I already screwed up decorum.
Yes, I would refer to Ms. Adams.
So the ministry does funds money for new growth. In terms of operation, it's a board issue. The board has an operating school. Yes, it is at 56% utilization at this moment, but we have a plan of implementation of introducing a program. So the board at this moment has supported the expansion of the IB. To put a school or a program into a school of that size, you need to have schools that have space. So we are pleased to honor comments that we've had in the community that they want an IB school. So again, to have a program like that big, you have to have schools that have space. So yes, they are at this point willing to continue operating the school and funding it for capital renewal.
So further funding will go in from a capital and renewal point of
Absolutely.
view.
Through the
And
chair,
then-
please.
Sorry.
Through the chair, please.
Sorry, through the chair. So through the chair, if the IB program then fails or that you don't get the capacity that they're anticipating, what are the other options that you had mentioned or that you guys had mentioned?
Mr. Adams?
Ms. Adams?
Okay. So at that time, they would look to us as planners and see what programs are needing expansion. And we would look to that at the secondary panel. We would potentially look at boundary changes if required, but I don't see one at this time. We would look forward to new development to see if it could, ensure the viability of a school. But those decisions aren't made until that decision that this program is not successful.
So currently, through the chair, there's no other program potentially in place to go into Williams if the IB program doesn't successfully bring in the number of students that you're looking for.
Mr. Adams?
Ms. Adams?
So there is no program at this moment that we're considering. The IB program is hugely successful at Bayview Secondary School. So we have great hopes for it in the 4 schools that it is going in.
Okay. Through the chair, I understand that there was a school that was just recently closed with an IB program that the IB program wasn't successful in. Is that correct?
I apologize. Can you repeat the question? I was speaking to
So
Mr.
through the chair, it's my understanding that a school was just recently closed that currently had an IB program, that the IB program wasn't successful in increasing its enrollment.
So that is not in our board. I'm not aware of that school.
Okay.
In our board, we've had great success. We have over 1,100 applicants every year.
Okay.
Currently, we only take in 116 students. We have to turn away over 1,000. This year, we had 1,500 people come to the information night due to the expansion. So we're very excited and pleased.
Okay.
Ms. Manhurst?
Forgive me, I have to get through my chicken scratch. So through the chair, in speaking with the Catholic School Board and in looking at the Catholic School Board numbers, capacity at St. Max was approximately, at the time, 9% over capacity. When reviewing your numbers, you guys had said that when you're applying for funding, the Ministry of Education looks at those numbers and then determines, it looks at both the Catholic and public school system when they determine a business plan and whether or not they're going to fund that business plan. By our calculations, the 3 schools are pretty close to that 100%, and I'll be honest, I don't know if it's 90, 95, 98. So when putting that business plan together, can the York District, can the public school board incorporate all 3 schools in that region in order to determine that 100% in order to fund a 3rd public school, but a 4th school in that region?
So,
Mr. Adams?
thank you, thank you. I apologize. So the process at this point from the ministry is that each business case is solely directed to each board, Catholic and public. We can absolutely ask that question.
Okay, thank you. It sounds to me, through the chair, it sounds to me that the ministry can potentially be prohibiting what you guys would think would be the ideal option or the ideal solutions, not just for Aurora, but for a variety of different regions. Have you attempted at all to change the ministry funding, for lack of a better question? Have you approached the ministry at all and showed them the flaws in their process? And has anybody tried to advocate to produce a better system?
Mr. Adams?
Yeah, I may answer that in that as a board, we have and regularly do try to inform feedback to the ministry. And the ministry also employs a number of former senior staff members and several from our own organization in very high leadership roles. And they're very cognizant of these concerns that we've raised over the years. And I think, and I'm not an apologist for the ministry, but I think there's a financial reality they're dealing with at this point in time as well. But we continue to do that at every opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Manners?
Through the chair, the replacement funding had been mentioned, and forgive me if I misheard, but it sounded like there wasn't a process in place to be able to go through a replacement funding process. Is that correct, or is there a process, and how does that work?
Mr. Adams?
Thank you. That program was discontinued. It did exist in 2007 and has been since discontinued in favor of the student accommodation index or capacity. I recall being on the board at that time. Those dollars were on the table from the ministry, and it was the will of the public that we didn't take advantage of it, and that program expired.
If I could round out that question. So the ministry has a capital priorities, which is growth, and it has consolidation. There is money for replacement if there are multiple schools closed to replace them with one facility. In the case of Williams, there would not be multiple schools closed. So there is no initiative to say that this building needs replacement and to move. That was done back in 2006 in a different financial time for the ministry.
Okay.
Mr. Manners, do you have any
One last question, I'm sorry. It's just for clarification for my own thought process. If the residents were to delegate at the board, would it be possible to have someone from the Ministry of Education present?
Mr. Adams?
I'll refer that to Ms. Adams.
We could pass on that request. It's probably highly unlikely. But absolutely, if part of your delegation was request that you had someone from the ministry, we would pass it on.
Okay, and just one final question. After today's meeting, is it possible for me to touch base with Ms. Adams and potentially Mr. Luchowski just to figure out how that process works?
I would work that through Mr. Adams.
Yeah, thank you, and I
Just
agreed, and I will
set that up.
facilitate whatever we need to do to, I'll be certain to have the delegation brought to the board at a suitable date, and I see no obstacle to that whatsoever.
Thank you very much for answering my questions and for being so patient.
Thank you, Ms. Manners. I'll go back then to Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a quick question in terms of if there is a delegation and the residents, are there any restrictions as to how many can speak at the delegations? Can councilors and mayor, can we all have an opportunity to delegate? I think I know the answer, but I'd love to understand how that process works, and where would that be held?
So all delegations go to our board, and we have a board standing and a board committee meeting on a monthly basis. So delegations are typically accepted at the board standing. Each delegate needs to fill out an application. The applications go into the director's office, and they go to the chair's committee. And the chair's committees has the chair of the board as well as other trustees and senior staff, and they review the applications, and it's through that process. So in terms of how many delegations, we've had many events where we've had multiple. There's always typically a time limit, as it is here, but it is through an application process.
And it's at the board office here on...
It would be at the board office, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Humphries. Councillor Perry, do you have any questions? I realize work commitments kept you away from most of this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was at the library board meeting. I had to be there for quorum, otherwise I couldn't have gone on tonight. I'm interested in just hearing what the residents have to say right now. I missed the presentation, so I don't think it's fair for me to ask questions that may have already been answered.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other speakers for a second time. Councillor Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we can get that, once we find out that date for when the residents will be able to delegate in front of the board, it might be useful, I think, that maybe we send a letter as a council to the ministry and ask for their attendance at this. I think that would be a good idea. I've reached out through email and through correspondence, and I have yet to receive anything back, but I think if we send that as a group, as a council, and make it an official letter to them and asking them to attend, I think that will go a long way to actually get them there.
Any other speakers? Second time. Councillor Humphries.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Quickly, please.
Really quick, just to kind of go back a little bit, and sorry, we're kind of, why did the school board buy the Bayview property in the first place?
Mr. Adams?
I can refer that to Ms. Adams.
So at the time of the 2007 decision, we knew there was concern from the community about relocating Bayview. It was a very tough time, a very emotional time, a lot of lobbying. It was, I imagine, like you as councillors dealing with it, this was the best choice the trustees could make at the time, trying to appease as many people as possible.
Perfect. And at that point, just from my perspective, when I look back, did it have also something to do with the just future planning of the secondary lands that we are developing and have developed? That also must have come in as well into play to know that there would be growth, right? I mean,
Absolutely. If you read the feasibility study, which is public, you'll see that planning or board staff acknowledged that population growth was going to shift. So every issue was presented to the table to the trustees. Again, it was a very difficult time.
absolutely, and I'm aware of that as well. I think I think for us, this is it's quite unique in many ways, the emotional, the reasoning behind it. But we do have that, I mean, the board has that property there. There was a future thought process that a school should be there. For whatever reason, it is what it is, and now we're looking for additional. I think when we do come to the board, or the residents come to the board, that there's going to be a really great, I think in terms of just this being a very different situation and unique. I don't know how many other situations are like this out there. Maybe I'm just selfish and I really want to care about Aurora, but are there any unique situations like this right now standing in York Region?
Every school situation
Is
replacement
unique.
is a unique situation. Every application that tells a different story.
Okay, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I mean in terms of having a school there for future growth, our property, yet because of the circumstance not being able to move forward and develop. Is there something like that out there right now that the ministry would?
So the board does own some sites for future development that we haven't built up. We have some in Vaughan that have development all around it. There's not a need there. Again, same case here. We have option agreements coming up for sites that most likely we won't be able to justify to buy. We have future sites and sites that we have held for future development. So this is part of our job to make sure that we're trying to protect the interest of the residents across all municipalities and protect the interests of the board for future growth.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate your patience, because, you know, I think you're hearing what we want.
I can
but
hear the frustration,
but
absolutely.
I absolutely appreciate it, because it helps me and it helps us think of different approaches. And to Councillor Marcus's point, perhaps, you know, drafting up a letter. I'd like to move a motion forward to have a letter written
We'll do that later.
with you, but from the mayor and us.
I'll just take that under advisement. We'll do that.
I want a motion.
Councillor Rack, no. Who are you? Councillor Thompson.
And I certainly support that. I just was going to add on to it that since we're dealing with a provincial agency, I think it's important to enlist the aid of our MPP, you know, Chris Ballard, and try and also use through his office to try and see if we'll get a better response, because as I'm hearing from other members of council, there's been some challenges in being able to track them down.
Councillor Abel, no, you've already, quickly?
I was just suggesting that we, just not the Ministry of Education, but the Minister, Mitzi Hunter, she's quite proactive. So is that what you meant? Okay, fine.
Councillor Perry, do you have anything at this? Okay. Good. Okay, everybody's spoken. Okay, like I say, this is rather unusual. Would you, okay, quickly, and I would appreciate it if you tried not to repeat anything that was already, which is really difficult, I understand. Okay. Name, rank, and serial number.
Okay. I apologize. I hope to not repeat. I have 4 very quick questions.
Microphone.
Sorry, I hope not to repeat. Stop me if I do. I have 4 quick questions. The first one is just a point of clarification. Is it at what percentage, what is the threshold that the YRDSB or the ministry considers closing a school?
Mr. Adams.
I don't know for sure, so I'll defer to Ms. Adams.
Thank you.
So we don't have a set percentage. We have closed, in the history that I have with the board, only one school, and it was due to the condition of the building as the major factor, and that was Wells Street Public School. We would look at development as a factor. We would look at, have we tried all programming to put in there? We would have to have space in the immediate area to send students. So it's multiple factors that we would have to look at. But is it where we have 50%, 40%? We don't have a number. It's a multiple case situation.
Okay, thank you. Another really quick one, is Aurora High still accepting students from outside their boundaries?
Through the chair, please.
Oh, sorry, Chair, please.
Thank you.
So in trying to, if I can answer, in trying to ensure that we get as many students as possible from the Bayview Northeast area, we haven't closed it to transfers. It is accepting. We will be adding a couple portables there, and probably most likely this fall or the following year, because we understand the frustration of the community. We know they're not attending Williams, and it's easier for them at this point to attend Aurora High. So yes, they are accepting.
Thank you. 2 more, sorry, I promise they're quick. The IB program, I know that the school board is pinning a lot of their hopes on the IB program, and of course everybody hopes that's successful because it's a wonderful program. However, my concern would be is that a lot of the students that get accepted in the IB program are actually coming from outside the Aurora catchment area. So I was wondering if you could ask them to please speak to how many students are actually going to be Aurora students in the IB. And now I know you need to work through, but generally as a rule of thumb, the board, I would assume, would have a general percentage in terms of how many are from the immediate community and how come from outside the community.
Yes, Ms. Adams would have accurate information.
So I can speak from experience for our Bayview Secondary School, which is an operating IB school. We look at absolutely every year where students come from, and we find that typically at least 80% or higher come from the immediate area. Once we get the acceptance numbers of who will be attending the Dr. Williams IB site, we will be doing that analysis as well. We'll be doing it I can't speak to it yet, I haven't seen the applicants. We don't see it until they have been granted acceptance into the program. But we monitor that and we track it and we present it to our trustees on an annual basis.
Mayor, I would hope that the council would follow up to find out what that number actually ends up being once they have their acceptances go out in January. And then lastly, I've read in documentation that approximately 2/3 of a school's working budget is based on enrollment. And with a capacity or a student enrollment at Williams currently sitting at the 56% mark, I wanted to know what the board was doing to help the working budget of Williams specifically. Because as a parent who has a child who's approaching the high school ages, I am personally, and this is a comment, petrified to send them to a school with such a low working budget that they may not have the funds to offer to my child attending that school, that other schools neighboring would have those benefits. I'm terrified.
What I would recommend is that if you come to the board as part of the delegation, is that we'll ensure that the principal of the school is there who can speak on how the school is funded and operated. I would recommend any parent who is considering different high schools or entering high school to visit both the public and the Catholic to review their options, but also really go visit Williams and see the wonderful things that are going on. It doesn't assuage your fear at this moment, but please come to the delegation. Please come to our board. We'll ensure that the principal is there and we'll have appropriate people to answer your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will...
I'm sorry, we didn't get your name. If you could just give it to Samantha, we'd appreciate it, please.
My name is Julia Chernoff.
Yep. Mr. Mayor,
Quickly,
I was
please.
going to add
Peter?
that I will forward the information on enrollment once I receive
I've
it.
got one more.
Okay, but I was just answering the question.
Hello. My name is Leah Zaharopoulos. I reside at 75 Hartwell Way. My question is more, I'm just looking for some clarification as well. We touched on this briefly. I just want to clarify. I realize that in order for us to even consider having a new school on our end, we need to fill up Williams.
Correct.
I feel, though, that we're at such a disadvantage because the numbers, when we're looking at the pupil accommodation and what exists right now, it's not really taking into consideration all the high school students on the east side and where they're going. As we talked about earlier with many of our students, it looks like 60% of students that live in the 2C area that are going to perhaps the Catholic school or other. When doing the pupil accommodation review, what I'm wondering is, will it take into, if we were able to do that, will it take into consideration exactly where all the students are going? Mr. Speaker.
So on an annual basis, we meet with the Catholic board to see how many students have switched to their board from the public board and how many students have vice versa. So if you're talking about applying for funding through a business case, the way the ministry, the process is right now, it doesn't look at that. They look at that separately, but the format that we fill out doesn't look at that. We can address it, and we always do a write-up and lobby the ministry, and we will ask them to look at that. The Catholic board, on the other hand, would say they want a viable school as well. Mm-hmm. But it absolutely tells part of the story of what's going on in the area. So we will take that comment back to the ministry because it is a factor that we deal with across the region.
If I can just comment on that, I feel like this is why we're at such a disadvantage. The numbers are not accurate. The numbers are not, everyone knows what's happening, but because it's not in black and white, I feel like we're put at a huge disadvantage. And I feel that if all the numbers were represented accurately, that if there was a new school at Bayview Northeast, it would be close to full, especially if we were to move over the IB program or any enrichment program there. So I just hope, I know that it's something that the board has, we can't request, the pupil accommodation review. We can't even request that it takes into consideration the Catholic numbers. But I think this is what's holding us back. I think if we really looked at the numbers are there.
So a pupil, just to clarify, a pupil accommodation review is a closure, basically a closure. So the way a closure works at this point is the board says it doesn't require this space, but the ministry would look at it, you can't close this school to open a new school. They have invested, through the ministry, the province, money in that facility. So really the application for us is through a growth project, and that's the capital priorities grant. If we had 2 schools to close, then we could recommend that. But this does not really, it isn't appropriate for a PAR, a pupil accommodation review. To close Williams means we would have to move students even further. They'd have to go down to Richmond Hill or up into Newmarket.
And where, are you talking about the students that currently reside on the west side?
Through the chair, please.
Sorry. Would that, Mr. Chair, would that be the students that currently reside on the west side? Is that who you're referring to?
No, I'm referring to the population that attends Williams. If we did a PAR and close that school, we would have to move them to existing schools that the board has. So you're really looking for replacement funding, which was an initiative many years ago, or you're looking for a business case to support a new growth. So a PAR is a closure, or it's a closure of multiple schools and a replacement of one on one of the sites, and grouping 2 or 3 schools together.
So ultimately, through Mr. Mayor, the trustees are the ones that would vote. It would have to be the majority of the trustees that would vote to help push along anything in our favor. Is that correct?
So,
That would be correct. It would require a strong recommendation from staff for a question that trustees could vote on, but that would be the way.
Okay. Thank you very
And
much.
a lot of these questions, and they're great questions, don't get me wrong, but you need to take those, remember those questions and take them when you delegate at the board. Because that way you've got, as Mr. Adams said, you've got the entire board as opposed to, as indeed, we are all here.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you coming up. Did we get? Yeah. Okay. We got it. Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Emily Nicasio. I'm also a resident in Aurora. Just one question, actually. I know we've talked about a few things like the delegation. What else can we as residents do to try to move things forward through
Mr.
the
Adams?
mayor?
Well, I think we've covered off many, and as has been mentioned, we need enrollment numbers to justify the construction of a new facility, and that really is the crux of it. That's where we're at, and that was the catch-22 we spoke to earlier. Without the enrollment numbers, the ministry won't fund the school. So it's where does it come from, and how could we do it responsibly, particularly as a regional board with 9 municipalities and many wishes in other areas as well. So it's the challenge that we're here to discuss. But Ms. Adams, can you add anything to that? Or?
I think things that we've talked, the issues that you can do in terms of lobbying the ministry, as I always say when I'm asked this question in other areas of the region, is attend our secondary school. Dr. Williams is a great school. We would love to have you come. We know it's more difficult than going to Maximilian, but there is a school bus special. And even if you don't attend it, go visit the school to truly understand your choices.
Thank you. And I think just one follow-up question through Mr. Mayor is when the decision was made a number of years ago not to build, you said it was a very emotional decision, and I suspect some of that came from the residents at the time. So just to clarify, there really isn't anything else we can do besides lobbying, besides emailing, to really sort of influence the way the residents seemed to be able to do the last time around.
So the difference between the last time is there was a funding initiative for replacement, and Williams was one of 22 schools identified. They all weren't replaced for replacement. This year, the funding initiatives that we have available to us at this time is through the growth model.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Name and address, please, sir.
Yes, good evening. My name is Anthony Polano. I live in Aurora, named on Ames Crescent. I am a neighbor of many of these people here, and I'm also kind of in this same position. I am lucky to have a 16-year-old boy who is an honor student at St. Maximilian. We don't really have too much debate regarding buses or walking. My wife drives them. So we spoiled them that way. But in any event, on a serious note, I've seen, and I've followed the group, the Northeast Aurora group of people that want the school, and I am one for it. I think that eventually the board is going to build a school. And I actually found the board that the trustee and madam that came here this evening extended, as far as I'm concerned, goodwill in apprising us of the facts. I'm a little bit surprised in view of the swell and the FB posts and the Twitter posts from the parents. And if I were in their position, I'd do the same thing. I would, as you know me, I would protest. But I'm just surprised that these good people, before coming to this meeting and before coming to this point, that they weren't provided with the information that Madam and Mr. Adams gave us this evening. I didn't know this. I didn't know that they have certain guidelines. I didn't know that they have to go through the ministry. And I didn't know that we don't know how to make a presentation to them. And I'm certain tonight, the parents didn't know either. And just to repeat, I'm not here, I'm just here as a parent, a concerned parent. I was enlightened by the board. Now I understand the situation better. I just think that it would have been nice if our counselors had provided us this information, or perhaps
Do you
should
have a
have.
question, sir, for the trustee?
No, I have a question for the council.
If you have, this is for the trustees.
Oh, for the trustee? I actually have no question. I just want to thank you so very much for coming here this evening on short notice and giving us the facts. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else? Mr. Adams, you said you had a couple closing remarks?
Yes, thank you. I mentioned earlier, I will forward the information on an IB enrollment to counselors and other persons in my email phone book as I get that have become available. And I just want everybody to know that I'm here to help. I've been doing it for the last number of months. This issue isn't brand new. It's been circulating around, and I intend to always be available as I can be, and share information as I get it. And everybody should know that they can contact me at any time.
Thank you very much.
And Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you very much coming out. We appreciate the information. You heard our frustrations. You heard the parents' frustrations. We'll try and get some resolve. All in favor of receiving the presentation then? Contrary? That's carried. So you want to put that motion forward, Councillor Humphries?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like a motion forward to draft up a letter from the mayor and Town of Aurora councillors to encourage the minister and principal MPP to be at the meeting that we have with the board, and to understand the support that we'd like to garnish for our residents of the East End.
Thank you. Second? Councilor Marcus, comments or questions on the motion? All in favor?
Mr. Mayor, our notice of motion had asked for a letter to be sent to our MPP and the Ministry of Education. Is that I assume was done?
I have to check, I believe so. But off the top of my head, I can't tell you.
If you wouldn't mind clarifying that for council, I don't want it to sound repetitive, but we're asking specifically for the meeting, which is great. And we said the ministry, right? The Minister of Education.
The minister, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. Confirming bylaw, please. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Gartner. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Kim, Councillor Perry. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much for coming out. And I'm sure that you will be in touch with the trustee and vice versa.